He stood in front of the prison bus and refused to move. No one listened until the manifest was double-checked. What they discovered inside sent every guard into panic. All right, here comes the full story. But first, drop your favorite dog's name in the comments and make sure you've hit that subscribe button because the next one, it might just leave you speechless. The morning began like any other at the North Creek Detention Facility, tucked in the wooded hills of Northern Virginia. The air was still thick from overnight rain, and fog clung stubbornly to the paved lanes that led in and out of the secure compound. Faint orange light stretched across the high barbed wire fences as the first rays of sun touched the guard towers. Inside the yard, guards moved with routine precision. Metal gates buzzed open and locked again in crisp succession. From a distance, it was a clean, calculated rhythm. But just beyond the bus garage, K-9 handler officer Reuben Callahan felt something off. Reuben had worked with patrol dogs most of his career, but today was different. His newest partner, Bolt, a 3-year-old Belgian Malinois, stood rigid at his side, not distracted, not tired, just wired. His head snapped toward the side gates each time the prison bus's engine rumbled. His stance didn't match any protocol alert, but it was enough to put Reuben on edge. Bolt wasn't a dog prone to nerves. He had been calm in riots, confident during tactical searches, and nearly fearless during past extractions. But this morning he hadn't touched his breakfast. And now, as the prisoners were being led out in single file under heavy restraint, Bolt's entire body seemed to shift, eyes locked on the bus. The tension was rising, invisible to most, but screaming to him. The transfer was scheduled weeks earlier. 13 inmates, all bound for a federal detention unit outside Harrisburg. Among them were high-level security risks, 3 with previous escape attempts, 2 former gang associates, and a handful of violent offenders with ties to cases still under active investigation. The manifest, a printed log of prisoner names, ID numbers, and seat assignments, had been reviewed and rechecked the night before. Each inmate had their number. Each officer had their file. Reuben wasn't part of the transport team. His job was perimeter check and security oversight, a role typically routine, but Bolt was assigned as part of the dog rotation for K-9 sweeps. He was supposed to run a final scan of the exterior of the bus and stand by during boarding. When the first inmate was loaded onto the steps of the vehicle, Bolt growled. It wasn't aggressive, not yet, just a low, rumbling vibration in his chest. Reuben gave a low command. Bolt didn't respond. The second inmate climbed aboard, then the third. Each time the restraints clicked, Bolt's growl grew louder. By the time the 5th prisoner was brought forward, Bolt lunged toward the base of the steps, snapping taut against his leash. Reuben planted his boots and pulled back. He hadn't seen that reaction from Bolt, not even when clearing riot cells. Guards turned to look. A few chuckled. One of them, Captain Briggs, raised an eyebrow. "Dog's got attitude today," someone muttered. Reuben didn't laugh. He studied the bus. Its tires were fresh, interior inspected, cameras rolling. There was nothing visibly wrong. So why was Bolt locked in? He circled, then growled again. And then, something he had never done during a live transport, he barked. Once, short, snapping. Then again, louder. Guards paused. "What's his problem?" a junior officer asked. "I don't know," Reuben said, his voice tightening. "But he's not guessing." Lieutenant Carly Monroe, transfer supervisor, exited the processing bay moments later, clipboard in hand. Her posture sharp, her eyes half-tired but alert. Years in corrections had taught her that small details were never as small as they appeared. When she saw Bolt's posture, ears forward, muscles coiled, her pace slowed. "Is he trained to alert to individuals?" she asked. "Mostly scent. Explosives. Contraband," Reuben replied. "And movement behavior. But this isn't protocol." Bolt moved to the side of the stairs again, then froze, his nose angled slightly upward. It wasn't directed at a bag or the tires. It was toward the inside of the vehicle, behind the tinted windows. By now, half the prisoners had boarded. The rest stood in a holding line, shackled and watched by 3 armed escorts. "He keeps locking in on the 3rd window," Reuben added. "Same spot." Lieutenant Monroe walked up the steps and glanced through the glass. She looked down at her clipboard, then back up. She stepped off the stairs. "Can someone double-check the interior placements?" No one responded immediately. The guards weren't used to double-checking things that had already cleared chain-of-command inspection. "We're on a tight schedule, Lieutenant," said Briggs. Monroe hesitated. She looked at Reuben. "Your dog ever been wrong before?" Reuben shook his head. "Not once. Not like this." The rest of the transport crew wasn't pleased. Delays meant risks, especially when moving multiple high-risk inmates across counties. Each delay would trigger a report, and reports raised red flags. The security lead wanted to continue boarding, but Bolt had other plans. As inmate number 11 approached, Bolt lunged forward again, this time nearly dragging Reuben with him. He barked twice, chest heaving, eyes locked once more on the 3rd window of the bus. Briggs scowled. "If that mute keeps this up, I'll have him removed," but Monroe stepped between them. "Stand down. I want the manifest checked again." Briggs let out a breath. "We've got 13 names. We've got 13 inmates. They're all here." "I didn't ask if they're present. I asked for verification," she said sharply. Reuben walked Bolt to the side, circling the bus one more time. The dog's nose swept the air like a radar dish. At the same spot as before, he stopped, nose twitching. He sat. Bolt never sat during sweeps unless his alert was final. Monroe called for a full re-verification. 2 officers returned to processing to retrieve original ID files, fingerprint logs, transfer slips. They checked the manifest. Each name, photo, and chain code. One file didn't match. A man listed as Joseph Waller, prisoner 94732, was processed into the bus manifest. He wore the right ID bracelet. He responded to the right name, but his print scan came back as Richard Dane, an entirely different individual transferred from a different prison unit a month earlier. No active record showed Richard Dane scheduled for this transport. Yet there he was, shackled to seat 7, 3rd window from the front. When Monroe boarded again and removed his mask, the chill spread instantly. She had seen Richard Dane's name before in incident reports. A high-ranking logistics planner for an interstate gang, former military, 2 escape attempts, believed to be connected to 3 unsolved guard deaths. He had been removed from the transport system due to those risks. And yet, he was on this bus. When the news hit the rest of the team, radios exploded. Officers began shouting. Briggs stormed toward the processing room demanding answers. Other guards began rechecking every inmate, one by one. Richard Dane sat calmly, hands folded. No resistance, no confusion. He had wanted to be caught, because the mistake wasn't the switch. The mistake was catching it too early. When Monroe returned to the bus to question him, Dane didn't look angry. He looked amused. Then he smiled. That was when Bolt's barking exploded, his body hitting the base of the stairs as if trying to tear through steel. Reuben grabbed his harness, barely holding him back. Something deeper was unfolding. When guards tried to remove Dane from the bus, they found something else. Beneath the seat where he had been placed was a small dented plate on the bus floor, barely visible. One of the guards pressed his boot against it. The steel gave slightly. Inside, a narrow cavity revealed a hidden pouch. Inside the pouch, tactical layouts, highway maps, and a set of false guard uniforms. They hadn't planned to leave quietly. This was meant to be the switch, the last-minute replacement. A man planted in the transport manifest to take someone else's place and break free from inside. His alias had slipped through the system. The escape wasn't failed, it had only just begun. And without Bolt, no one would have even known. The air around the transport yard had shifted. What began as a routine inmate transfer had mutated into something surgical, calculated and deliberate. The officers stood still for a moment, processing what had just been uncovered. The false ID, the forged manifest entry, the hidden cash below the bus seat. Richard Dane had not escaped, he had entered, and that made everything worse. Lieutenant Monroe's voice was sharp over the radio. All movement halted. I want 2 officers on every remaining inmate, now. Recheck restraints. Get me a sweep on the rest of this bus, under the seats, under the floorboard, anywhere there's a weld. 3 tactical officers rushed back into processing to verify if any other names in the manifest had potential aliases. Monroe stood at the base of the bus stairs, her shoulders square, clipboard clutched in her hand. Richard Dane remained seated inside the bus. His hands were cuffed, his legs shackled, but there was something in his stillness, like he was watching the timeline shift around him. Bolt sat by Reuben's side, motionless but alert, eyes burning a hole through the side of the bus. His tail didn't move, his ears didn't flick. He had gone completely silent. Reuben recognized the posture. This wasn't just alert mode, this was target acquisition, and that meant there was more. Dane's presence inside the vehicle wasn't just dangerous, it was tactically impossible without inside help. The guards back at the intake unit began pulling surveillance footage. 3 officers rotated through the prisoner intake wing that morning. One of them, Officer Keller, had stepped outside the main hallway for 7 minutes. No explanation, no log. When questioned, Keller claimed he had responded to a call for assistance in the supply corridor. There was no record of that call. By the time the footage was rewound to the correct timestamp, the answer was obvious. Keller had paused at the door leading to the intake wing. He turned his back to the hallway camera. A man in the corner, head down, handcuffed, moved through the line. Not one of the scheduled 13 inmates. It was Dane. Dane had not come to escape alone. His quiet smile and lack of resistance weren't signs of surrender. They were signs of a man buying time, deliberately inserting himself into a system that had been trained to reject him, and it almost worked. If Bolt hadn't frozen at that third window, it would have worked. As the officers rescanned the interior of the bus, Monroe found something else. A small cut in the vinyl seam of seat 10, about 4 rows behind Dane. Stuffed inside was a burner phone, turned off, battery removed. 2 messages were still stored in the draft folder. Manifest clear, drop at marker, 17 minutes, backup access route confirmed, exit Northridge trailhead. Monroe turned pale. This wasn't just a swap. It was a planned detour. Dane had intended to disappear after the convoy was in motion, after the bus had cleared the outer perimeter, after the switch had gone unnoticed. The drop location, Northridge trailhead. A narrow gravel turnoff that intersected with the transport route just 15 minutes into the trip, surrounded by forest. No surveillance, no line of sight. They would have stopped there, staged a mechanical failure perhaps, and Richard Dane would have vanished into the hills. And according to the second message, someone was waiting for him there. Monroe called it in. All units adjust transport status to code amber. Situation now classified as active internal breach. Request immediate air surveillance. Intercept all secondary vehicles within a 20-mile radius. She didn't wait for approval. A 2-car escort pulled out immediately toward Northridge. Meanwhile, the rest of the team resecured the inmates in holding cells inside the facility. The transfer was canceled. Federal officers would now need to take custody. But Monroe had one problem. Dane wouldn't talk. He sat calmly on the bench seat inside the bus, hands folded, eyes steady. When questioned, he gave name, date of birth, nothing more. "You won't find them," he said once, almost like a whisper. "They're gone already." Reuben stood a few feet away, watching the man's every movement. Bolt had not moved once since Dane was removed. Something about him still had the dog on edge. Something was still wrong. An officer inside processing called out. The number of inmate files didn't match the original paperwork. There were 14 files. Only 13 prisoners were scheduled for the transport. Dane made 14, but the 14th name in the paperwork was not Dane. It belonged to another inmate, Kyle Mercer, who had been cleared for a separate transfer 2 weeks from now, but his file had been altered. The number on Mercer's file had been modified to match Dane's scanned ID tag. That meant someone had already built the switch from the inside. All they needed was a trigger to start the motion. And they would have had it if not for Bolt. The officers dispatched to Northridge arrived at the trailhead within minutes. What they found confirmed the worst. A white utility van labeled with a fabricated telecom company name was parked off the gravel shoulder, doors wide open. Inside, rope, bolt cutters, spare clothes, a thermal backpack, 2 prepaid phones, and a stack of burner license plates. No sign of anyone nearby, but a pair of fresh boot tracks led into the woods. The route was narrow, angled toward the river basin that bordered state land. Whoever had waited for Dane had left in a hurry, but they had been there. Back at North Creek, Monroe made a decision. The bus would be re-inspected from top to bottom. She called in the facility's mechanical inspection team. They removed several floor panels, unscrewed insulation, and peeled back sections of overhead lining. That's when they found it. A small square transmitter, no bigger than a deck of cards, duct-taped inside the air duct housing beneath the third row of seats. It wasn't a bomb, it was a signal blocker. For approximately 20 minutes, it would jam radio signals, shortwave trackers, and GPS pings originating from inside the bus. Had the convoy proceeded, the escort team would have lost all tracking capability during the most isolated part of the route, and Dane would have vanished without a trace. Later that evening, Dane was placed under heavy restraint in an isolated cell. No sound, no lights, only a steel table and a federal investigator. He gave nothing, no names, no targets, no locations. But as the officer left the room, Dane smiled again, like the move wasn't over. And that smile crawled into Reuben's head like a warning. Back in the K-9 compound, Bolt remained unsettled. Even after Dane had been taken, even after the rest of the inmates were removed, he paced the chain-link edge of the enclosure, his posture not alert but almost searching. That night, Reuben sat alone with Bolt in the concrete pen. He watched the dog's pattern, saw how he'd pause at one spot along the eastern wall, sniff, turn, then circle again. On the third pass, Bolt sat. Reuben crouched beside him. The spot Bolt had stopped at, a vent housing, part of the facility's outbound air duct system. It had a panel, barely secured. Reuben unscrewed the latch and removed it. Inside, wrapped in a thin canvas bag, was a second burner phone, unpowered, battery beside it. Reuben turned it on. There was one message in the inbox. If the dog barks early, switch to Plan B. The phone had no signal. Whoever had written that was still nearby. The burner phone found in the air duct was more than just a communication device. It was proof that Richard Dane hadn't acted alone. It meant the plan wasn't improvised. It was organized, resourced, and deeply embedded into the very routine that was supposed to prevent failures. Reuben Callahan sat in the facility's admin office with Bolt lying silently at his side, head resting near his boots. The message on the phone kept echoing in his thoughts. If the dog barks early, switch to Plan B. The implication was chilling. They had factored in Bolt, factored in that he might catch on, which meant someone had been watching Bolt, tracking how he worked, learning how to time his patterns. Someone inside. Facility logs were pulled, visitor records, dog shift schedules. Reuben worked 5 rotations a week. Bolt was part of scheduled training on Mondays and Thursdays. His bus inspection duty that morning had been a last-minute substitution due to a handler injury the night before. That change was made by an assistant logistics officer named Kevin Hartwell, a junior desk worker, not field-trained, not tactical, but with full access to scheduling software. When Monroe reviewed the rotation records, it became clear Hartwell had overridden the original K-9 assignment 24 hours earlier. No one noticed. And when questioned later, he claimed it was a typo that placed the only K-9 with a perfect alert record next to the transport that had just been hijacked from the inside. It wasn't a typo. Hartwell didn't report for duty the next morning. Officers went to his apartment, a second-floor unit 10 minutes from the facility. Inside, the furniture was intact, but the drawers were empty, clothes gone, phone left behind with the battery removed. They searched the apartment for hours, but Bolt led them straight to the one thing no one had noticed, the hallway coat closet. Inside, behind a row of uniforms buried beneath layers of plastic bins, was a false floorboard. Bolt clawed it open. Inside, one laptop, 2 storage drives, and a sealed envelope. Inside the envelope were 2 things: a bus route map, or photo of Reuben and Bolt during a past transfer, Someone had been watching them closely. The laptop's hard drive revealed message logs with GPS coordinates, alias names, and references to uniform drop points. Hartwell was supposed to be Dane's final extraction lead, and he hadn't gone far. An old hunting shack registered to Hartwell's uncle sat just over the border in West Virginia, tucked deep inside a pine thicket near Millstone Creek. 2 hours later, the shack was surrounded by tactical teams. Inside, maps, fuel containers, one assault rifle, but Hartwell was gone. However, a drone sweep revealed a trail of disturbed brush moving north, leading toward a logging road. They followed it for 6 miles before finding him lying face down beneath a ridge, self-inflicted wound, no signs of struggle. He'd taken his own life before being captured, but his laptop had already said enough. 3 names were circled repeatedly in Hartwell's drive logs: Richard Dane, primary asset; Kyle Mercer, cover identity; Contact W, never identified. Investigators believe Contact W was the true coordinator, someone embedded deeper, someone who could clean records, assign inmate files, and erase footage. No trace of W was ever recovered. But the plan had clearly failed. Dane's smug silence during interrogation gave way to quiet fury once he learned Hartwell was gone. The strength of his plan had been in the layers: false logs, staged transport, embedded insiders, and a 70-pound K9 had ripped it all apart before the wheels even rolled out of the yard. 3 weeks passed. The story never made headlines. Too sensitive, too close to a breakdown in internal security. But inside North Creek, one event brought the entire staff together. A commendation was issued for Reuben Callahan and K9 Officer Bolt, not just for uncovering the breach, but for trusting instincts when the system failed to listen. Lieutenant Monroe addressed the room. In corrections, we train for structure, routine, order. But when someone tries to exploit that order from the inside, it takes instinct to stop them. Officer Callahan chose to listen when no one else did, and his partner Bolt made that choice possible. Reuben accepted the commendation quietly, but his eyes never left Bolt. He knew the truth. It hadn't been him who stopped it. It was the dog. After the ceremony, Reuben took Bolt out for a walk along the tree line just past the rear fence. Beyond it, hills rolled gently beneath early autumn haze. Bolt's head was high, his movements relaxed. Reuben crouched beside him. "You knew it before I did," he whispered. Bolt turned, eyes sharp but calm. There was no applause out here, no medals, just one man and one dog and the feeling that they'd held the line when it counted. Reuben reached down and rubbed behind Bolt's ears. "You didn't just stop and escape," he said quietly. "You reminded all of us why we trust the ones who don't speak." Bolt's tail gave a single slow wag. That was enough. That evening, Reuben returned home and pulled a photo from his drawer. It showed his late father, also a handler, kneeling beside his old German Shepherd during a graduation ceremony. The frame had faded at the corners, but the pride in his father's eyes hadn't. Reuben set the new commendation beside it. He didn't need to say anything. Bolt lay at the foot of the couch, head on his paws, eyes half closed. Another job was done. Another day, saved before it began. And no one else would ever know, if not for the bark that stopped the bus. That one bark changed everything. Imagine if it hadn't. More untold moments like this are coming, and trust me, you'll want to be here when they do. So hit like, tap subscribe, and make sure you're with us when the next dog saves the day.